Well, a big week of news, plenty to get across. Of course, Parliament's back on Monday next week. So we'll look a bit forward and we'll look a bit back with my Friday night regular partner in crime, the new host of Overnights on 2GB and Radio 4BC, Luke Grant. Well, Luke, I am very delighted to congratulate you on your new position, but I love listening to you. I'm a bit of a night owl. I love listening to you now middle of the week rather than just on weekends, so congratulations. Yes. Let's go into the National Cabinet today. Mm-hmm. They announced with all this fanfare what they are calling the 40-year revolution or reform of Medicare, which is really just a discussion paper. Let's be absolutely honest. And I went through some of the things the Prime Minister could have fixed today. They're absolutely 100% on the Commonwealth's desk. What did you make of the reform? Because you would hear, like me, a lot of concerns at the service delivery end, in hospitals, of course, but also in GP clinics from ordinary Australians who say the system's broken.
Well, two things come to mind immediately. First off, you should be Health Minister, because the obvious thing they could have done today, as you said in your editorial, was to do something about the drama that they have, that every government has, with general practice. Those rebates have been frozen for so long. That would be a sign of good faith that would allow you to imagine the governing bodies to be more hand in hand with government, whatever they decide to do. But I was astonished when I listened back. You just played it there. All that the Prime Minister said was, we've agreed to make health our number one priority. Wow, thanks a lot, champion. That's really going to help. No ideas, all about the announcement. And you know what, Peter, in that room today, they're all Labor leaders except for two, and that two, I think, in March will become one. So he's playing with political friends who are not going to nod along and do what they can to get their bit, but, pose a line. So it's a very different National Cabinet to that Scott Morrison faced, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it was a lot of motherhood today. And I think people have had enough of motherhood. They can see through the spin. Another discussion paper. I make the point, the states run the public hospitals, not the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth tips in money, of course they do. And the Commonwealth runs Medicare, so the GP end. Now, if everyone just stuck to their knitting, we might be in a better position as a country. But the more the Commonwealth funds state things or sets the regulations of state responsibilities, the more you become sort of the daddy government and the mummy states, right? So you have a situation where there's cover for underperforming states. They just blame the Commonwealth. And, there's not often that I want to quote Kevin Rudd on this program, but he used to talk about, the buck stopping. And eventually he said, I think it was about 2009, that he would put forward a referendum to get the Australian people to give him the authority to take over health. So there wasn't this buck passing. I reckon that stuff is back on the table if nothing much comes out of this discussion paper.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope the Premier's... I mean, you could easily argue, couldn't you, Peter, that the states look after the real estate and everything that happens inside that real estate is a responsibility and, of course, comes to the funding of the federal government. I mean, the duplicity in a state and federal system around health, there's other areas as well. No one will ever convince me that there's not waste. There has to be. I don't know if this government, you're right, they love the announcement, they love the virtue signalling and the woke stuff, they love it. They're addicted to it. I don't know if they've got the whatever it takes to do that sort of reform. But gee, I reckon a lot of Australians would say, you know what, that makes sense. This intervention does make sense.
Yeah, I wish you'd talk about fixing public hospitals and fixing Medicare as much as you're talking about The Voice, but I'll get into that later in the show. In Victoria, the police there are pushing the government pretty hard to ban bikie colours. These are the badges and the motifs that we know the bikie gangs use. Part of it's a recruitment drive. We also know the laws in Victoria are way more lax than other states. And there's long been talk, of course, of the links between some bikie gangs and some militant unions. A lot of organised crime happens inside these outlaw bikie gangs. We know a lot of it relates to illicit drugs. Surely the Victorian government's got to fall into line now with the other states, Luke.
Yeah, well, you'd think so. It was a bit surprising to hear that it's not as comprehensive as legislation elsewhere. Look, I firstly, Lydia Thorpe will have to find something else to wear, so that's her challenge. But the other thing is, why don't we agree on this stuff? It seems obvious to me if you introduce legislation in Queensland and say New South Wales, okay, they're not so bikie-friendly states anymore. Where can they go? Let's duck down to Victoria. There's no problem there. I mean, why don't they work together? We talk about National Cabinet, the meeting of these minds. These are the obvious things, Peter, just in terms of getting the whole country right, moving together, the government should just do. I think, good on the Victorian government for doing it, even though they're a few years late to the party. Please get it done.
100%, and you remind me of a comment the Prime Minister made today in the press conference after receiving a briefing about that terrible police shooting in Queensland, that he would put back on the table this idea of a national gun register. Now, we've been talking about a national firearms register in this country as long as I've ever worked in politics. So this is something that's just got to get done and stop the duck showing.